When I do a cabinet, I draw it completely in SketchUp. You probably got a chance to watch that little SketchUp tutorial I did on drawing cabinets, and this is the one that I used in that tutorial because it's kind of complicated. It's got a breadboard in it. It's got an outside corner that has to be mitered. I even printed off another drawing of that outside corner so you could see that miter there. All of these things are so important because every dimension is critical, and if you can go out to your shop and cut each piece precisely to the proper dimension before you get started, boy, it saves a lot of mistakes and it keeps your attitude up high, which is really important. I found if I don't have really good drawings or a story pole, I come out to my shop, I make really stupid mistakes because my head starts to float around and think about other things like how excited I am that I'm finally building the cabinets or something, and then boom, I make a mistake, I lose that really awesome mood, and everything goes to just becomes terrible and real quick. So this is the first two pieces that I started with. This is that miter that I'm going to be installing, and it's just going to come together just like this, but I'm reinforcing this miter with dominoes. This is a domino machine. If you're not familiar with it, well, it's probably because it cost, I think, $1,200 plus another $400 for a dust collector. So usually, mostly only pros have these things. But if you have the funds or if you have one, this is just an awesome way to reinforce joinery and cabinetry. With this, on this miter joint, it's particularly useful because it'll draw the miter together nice and tight right to the long point, and it'll reinforce the joint as I'm assembling the cabinet, so I won't be sliding back and forth on that miter. But you've got to be really careful when you set this up. We're going to want to make sure that these domino mortises are cut real high on this tool. Otherwise, the domino can come right through the cutter, and the domino can come right through the back of the material. This domino is cut. These mortises are cut for these dominoes too far down from the short point, and look what happens. The domino comes right out the back. So to do this, a lot of people like to set these things up by first dropping the fence down until it bottoms out. And that's a big mistake, because if you drop the fence down first until it bottoms out, it doesn't really bottom out. It ends up leaving a little gap right here. You want this thing to bottom out all the way. And that means you have to actually rotate the fence first. You want to take the fence and rotate it to 45 degrees, because you've got to have the fence at 45 degrees to put a domino into a miter, and then loosen up the height of the fence and drop the fence down all the way. And now look what happens. It actually pinches right against the base of the domino, which is exactly what you want. So that'll bring that mortise up real high on a miter, so it's almost at the short point. These are cut much higher, right near the short point, maybe 1/8 of an inch down from the short point, and that means I'll never have to worry about the mortise cutting right through the face of the material. I'm going to keep it flat and kind of hold it down nice and snug and slide it forward until the butt end where the mortise, where the cutter is, until it comes right up against the miter, and then I'll stop. And then when I plunge cut this, I'm going to hold my hand right back here at the rear of the tool. I'm not going to hold it here. If I hold it here, the tool will have a tendency to rock as I put pressure on it. I'm going to hold it back here, and I'm going to push straight down into the bit, so everything is in alignment. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the center of the cutter when there's a line right here on the tool, and you can see it. Check this out. There's a line. There's several of them, actually. There's this little delta here, and then there's a line right here on the gauge. I'm going to line that up with my pencil line, and that's it. Cutting a mortise for each one of these that's substantially bigger. They're wider, they're the same thickness, but you can see that the mortise here is wider than the domino itself. And that's going to give me a little wiggle room. So when I put this piece together, it'll slide back and forth just a little bit. It'll still register the miter perfectly, but it doesn't have to register in the top and the bottom of the sheet perfectly. And it makes it a little bit easier to lay out all of these cuts. let's look at what else I got going on here. You'll see I got blue tape all over the place on these sheets. And that's because a lot of these are going to get pocket holes. Now, pocket holes are kind of like, some people hate them, some people love them. But they're a really great technique for putting together cabinets real quick. I don't like using them where they're going to be exposed, so I try my best to hide them. And that's why I've labeled all of this. This is the inside of the side, and I'm going to pocket hole right behind the front of each panel where the face frame is going to be attached. It'll make it a lot easier for me to attach the face frame later on. And I'm going to run some pocket holes in the very top of this panel, so when I set the top onto this cabinet, I can run some pocket screws through there to secure the top down. So I've marked exactly where I want my pocket holes. This is the bottom of the cabinet. None of these holes will be visible because it'll be upside down. Very few of these will be visible. And in the actual back of the cabinet, I'm going to put a few pocket holes on the inside, and I'm going to run a few pocket holes through the outside on that end. That's why I put this blue tape on, so I don't get confused about where I want to cut the pocket hole. This is a Kreg pocket hole jig. They cost about $100, maybe a little more than that. But boy, it's a tool that anybody that has any interest in woodworking or cabinetry or something, it's something you should own. You just take a block of wood, anything you want, clamp it into the jig, take your drill motor, comes with the bit and everything, and it drills a perfect pocket hole. So you can put a screw right in here at an angle, and the tip of the screw will come through this point right here and fasten stuff together. Real easy, real quick. This has revolutionized the way people can build cabinets and trim work and stuff like that. But that little jig is kind of slow, so I use this model here that does the same thing. It's a Kreg Foreman, and boy, it makes the process a lot faster. I put blue tape on my workpiece so I know exactly where the pocket holes go. And this one is the bottom, so it gets pocket holes in every side. So the blue tape goes up against the table of this, and then I just slide it back, and that's all I have to do. Slide this right through the machine and just poke a pocket hole in everywhere I want one. And that's it. Pocket holes all the way around. And in just a minute, you'll see how we assemble all of this. But first, I got to cut pocket holes into all those other pieces. Blue tape down. It really pays off to not hurry things. Try to enjoy the process. But more than anything, try to see the whole picture before you jump ahead. And in this case, I got this wheel well sticking into this cabinet here, and it'll be a heck of a lot easier if I notch that cabinet while the pieces are separate, while they're not assembled together. So I'm making templates so that I can do that. Here's one that fits from this direction, and it slides right in like so. So I'll be able to follow this template with my pencil right on the piece, right on the side of that cabinet, and cut it before I assemble everything. And here's another template that comes in from this direction, and that gives me, comes in just like this. That gives me the cut on the back, so that I can cut the back before I assemble it too. And with these two pieces, I can figure out what the cut is for the bottom as well. And that'll be kind of handy to do before I assemble this thing, because cutting those, once I assemble it, will be a real pain in the neck. Now to make these is real simple. It's the same technique I showed you from the very beginning. I use my scribes. I set a piece of wood in close. I take my scribes and I run it right down like this. And I just keep cutting it until it fits right. You learn to spread your scribes the right amount eventually, but until then, just cut it a bunch of times and you'll get better and better and better with your scribes. I've got both of these templates set now. Yeah, I did that while the camera wasn't running because it took me a while to figure out exactly which way to position them. I think I've got it right. And this is the one that comes in from the side. If you haven't been watching from the beginning, I should probably show you this little base that I glued onto my jigsaw. Some of it's splitting off a little bit here, but that won't matter. I glued a piece of 1/8 inch plywood to the bottom of my jigsaw. I extended out past the base on the saw in all directions so it gives me a flatter surface to put against my workpiece, which helps me guide the saw a lot easier. The saw doesn't have a tendency to tip as much, which is always a kind of one of the real bummers about a jigsaw. I also made a slight cut, just a little kerf right here in the front. You can see what I'm talking about. And that helps me find the line a little bit better when I'm cutting. I'm going to put this miter together first because it's the trickiest part of the whole assembly. When I glue these up, I try not to put too much glue near the short point of the miter because it squeezes out and I don't want to have to get inside that inside corner to clean up the glue later. Even with a wet rag, it's kind of tough to get all the glue off of that raw Doug fir. And boy, like that, once you get that glue onto that Doug fir, it can interfere with the stain taking. It can leave a mark in the clear finish if you're not staining. So be careful with the glue if you're using stain grade material. And then I'll set the dominoes into those mortises. Now that that's tight, I can put a clamp across here. I put some 2P10 under that scrap that I cut off of there. I'll glue that back on real quick. Now I can get a clamp on there and draw this miter nice and tight. That's what I want. And using this piece of soft pine, it kind of creases that corner together while that glue is still a little bit wet and seals up that miter, and at the same time it softens it. And then I can take some sandpaper and just wipe it off. This is the piece that was glued on with 2P10, and that's how easy that was. Sure came in handy while I was putting that clamp on there. I like using the glue on pocket holes. Some people don't. They just rely on the screws. But I kind of feel like every bit of insurance helps a little bit. I'm just going to flush this up. And I'm going to tack this with a 21 gauge pin nailer, brad nailer, and get it nice and flush. Now the brads I'm using aren't going to secure this. They're just going to hold it kind of stiff while I drive in the pocket screws. Pocket screws are kind of funny as you drive them in, especially the ones from the Craig tool. They're at such a steep angle. There is another pocket hole device that you can get. I don't own one, but it's a much more shallow angle. But with this steeper angle, it tends to drive this piece in that direction, so it kind of slides across that wet glue. So I'm going to kind of eliminate that, prevent that from happening by driving these brads in first. And none of them are going to show. It's such a small hole that none of them would show anyway, but in this case they're not going to show at all because this side here isn't visible. And now I'll just drive in my pocket screws. It's nice using a screw gun or a drill motor that has a clutch like this one does, so you can engage the clutch. If you're not used to running pocket screws, I usually use an impact driver, but you definitely shouldn't if you haven't done this a lot. The clutch helps because it's really sensitive. It'll prevent you from over driving these, which you really don't want to do. I'm going to be using an 1.5 inch face frame on the bottom of these cabinets, which means I want to take the bottom shelf and elevate it on the sides and in the back by 3/4 of an inch. because the bottom shelf is 3/4 of an inch thick. With a 3/4 inch space, it'll give me 1.5 inches for the bottom face frame. I position the bottom so that the spacer is maybe about a 32nd of an inch proud of the very bottom of this back. And that way, as I drive in this screw, it slides it forward just that little bit, and now it's perfectly flush. Last one. Oh, whoops. I didn't cut the scribe on the bottom shelf. Oh, that's another reason pocket screws are so cool. Unlike nails, these are real easy to remove. Now, I'm going to put a clamp on this thing. Instead of nails, this will be a lot more certain, a lot more secure. Put a little pressure on it, and then I can adjust it. Right where I want it. Nice and flush. And it won't move when I'm driving these pocket screws. And that's it. The whole thing's together. And these pocket holes I'm going to be using later to secure the face frame. Normally, I wouldn't do this. I'd just finish the cabinet because I'd be confident that I measured it correctly, but this is the inside of my spinner, and it seems like every one of these weird curved surfaces, like this wall back here and this notch for the wheel well, I feel a lot more comfortable if I test fit this thing. So I got the wire for the 110 run through there, and there it is. Fits perfectly, nice and tight to the wall. The countertop will sit right there. Countertop will come up to there. And now I can check out some of these other details, which are really critical. You can see my original marks here. This was where I felt the cabinet should end. And this would be the thickness of the face frame. And this is the reveal between the front of the face frame and the refrigerator. I want to match that reveal on this side. But the problem is, I'm going to put about a 3/8 inch piece of trim on top of this wall. It's going to have a rabbet in it. This wing A trim is going to be rabbeted and slip inside of here to hold that wall at the right thickness, and the trim will come out to the face of the shower and butt against the cabinet. But at 3/8, it's going to come out real close. There'll only be a 1/4 of an inch left right here between the wing A and the refrigerator. I want that same reveal over here. And on this side, it's more like a fat half, almost 5/8 of an inch. So if you'll notice over here, I put a little note right there, minus a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to scribe this corner off a 1/4 of an inch, slide this whole wall over to the left, a 1/4 of an inch. I know it's not very much, but that'll even out the reveals between the refrigerator, the cabinet, and the shower. And when I walk inside of here, I'll be so much happier.